No doubt this is a critical year regarding legislation and policy, and we heard from our conference attendees last year that they wanted us to focus more on policy research this year. So in the spirit of community engaged research, I wanted us to hear from an expert who is engaging and equipping their community to drive policies that specifically support Black and brown folks. And thankfully, I found Charli Cooksey. I don't know where I've been all this time because she has been doing amazing work. She is a grad of Prairie View A&M. She is the CEO of WEPOWER in St. Louis. WEPOWER's mission is to activate community power to redesign systems to be just and equitable for all. Through this work, Charli and her team and many excellent partners work with everyday folks to support them with building political and economic power in service of community-led systemic change. I don't know if she's going to have time to brag, but I'm going to brag on my sister and her team. WEPOWER has secured over $15 million in public funding for early childhood education. They have helped businesses increase their revenue 3.5 times. They have launched a nationally recognized multi-million-dollar investment fund and grown multiple coalitions led by residents and community-based organizations committed to economically just policies. Let's welcome Charli Cooksey.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's such an honor to be here, especially in such a historic campus that has impacted our country in so many ways, historically, currently, and to come. So I'm Charli Cooksey. I am a St. Louis native, born and raised. I need to get the clicker. This is big. And I'll be talking a little bit about my story, how it's led to the work of WEPOWER and our deep commitment to community engaged policy design and advocacy and power building. And I'll close up with just a few case studies and how we apply a few principles to our work of doing community-based policy change informed by community-based research. And I'll have one, maybe two calls to action for you all. So I have always had this deep obsession with Batman, even to the point where on Halloween, I would dress up as the Joker and any of those characters. But I show this picture usually when I'm talking in St. Louis because unfortunately, I often see St. Louis as a real life version of Gotham City, a place that is deeply entrenched with very complicated problems, very problematic leaders, and yet I still have an unwavering hope that we can do better and we will do better by our city and it'll turn from Gotham to a city of promise. So that is my origin story, and that's me usually when I have big hair. Which is most days of the week. But I started off in St. Louis. I was determined to go to a historically Black college. I ended up at Prairie View. I went there to play tennis. Ooh, that is so exciting. So I went there to play tennis and got really immersed in electoral justice work, fighting for students to be able to register to vote, to make sure we had polling locations on campus. I even ran for school board in undergrad, lost miserably. They strategically arranged for the election to be about 4 days after the school year ended so that the student body wasn't able to vote. And came full circle, came back to St. Louis through a program called Teach America, taught middle school English. And while in the classroom, quickly realized that my students were living in the same neighborhood, the same hood as me, and they were waking up and falling asleep to the same bullets, sirens, ambulances. And that called me to action to figure out what is my responsibility both in and out of the classroom. So started an educational access and leadership development organization called Inspire STL, had a lot of success with that. And then the summer that our first cohort of scholars graduated from high school was the same summer that Michael Brown Jr. was murdered. So we were coming back from a team retreat. We were all feeling good about ourselves, our first group of scholars going on to college. And that same day was the day I was scrolling Instagram and saw the poster where it said, Ferguson police just killed my unarmed son. And that changed my life. And I think a lot of the lives of folks here and not in this space today. So in that moment, I started to think deeply about how we go from me being passionate to doing direct service and trying to solve really complicated problems through programmatic work, to how do we shift towards truly building power so that we won't ever have to get to a moment where Black folks are putting their bodies on the line, on the front line, and still not being able to have our full dignity and humanity acknowledged and recognized. So that is the origin story for WePower. And so we exist to hold space for Black and brown folks to dream of better futures, but not just dream of those futures, build and wield enough power to bring those futures to bear. So here's our jargony mission statement, theory of change. And so we activate community power to redesign social systems. Right now, we are reimagining and redesigning our early childhood social system in St. Louis and our economic system. We do that in 3 ways. First is a reimagination campaign led by and centering impacted people. The second way we do that is through developing leaders and organizations' capacity to drive that systems change. And the third thing we do is we support those leaders and organizations as they drive campaigns, coalitions, and projects that take that vision and bring it to life. So we have 2 really big visions that align perfectly to the theme of this year's conference. One is to close the racial wealth gap, and the second one is to make sure that affordable, quality healthcare is available to every family in every neighborhood across our region. So I wanted to ground us in the legendary Dr. Angela Davis and her words, especially in a year like this when things feel even more insurmountable and when stakes feel higher than ever, and when we see so much going on locally and globally. This always keeps me grounded. And it says you have to act as if it were possible to radically transform the world, and you have to do it all the time. And that is so true for me. I got a text yesterday with a partner going off with me. I'm like, what did I do? All the way to reading news articles that critique or question even the need to invest in early childhood. It's really important that we ground ourselves in possibility, but also commit to the resilience that is needed for us to truly change outcomes for our young people and their families. So we are always thinking about power. For us, we define power simply as the ability to act, the ability for someone to self-determine their own future. And we are trying to build a certain type of power, relational power, not power over or zero sum, but we believe that we can steadily, individually and collectively increase power, and that doesn't necessarily mean I have to take your power in order to build power over here. And we see power coming from 3 sources. This is an example that we do not endorse, but it is an example that clearly and strongly articulates what is possible when we build power. So we see power coming from organized people, organized money, and positions. So an example of this is the NRA, the National Rifle Association. So they have about 5 million members nationwide. That has turned into about over $100 million in membership dues every year. And then they are able to leverage that $100 million, those 5 million members, to vote and to put resources behind elected leaders that can advance their goal of gun rights. And so they have influenced the Trump campaign and support him getting elected. And they have influenced over 300 elections across our country. And that was just in one electoral cycle, as I understand it. So imagine if we organize people, money, and positions towards transforming our early childhood system across the country. Imagine if we organize these sources of power towards truly building wealth and economic mobility for Black and brown people. So that's the work we do at WePower, and we hope that others commit to this theory of change as well. So this is a visual. We got this from FSG. When we talk about building power, it's towards what end? So for us, when we think about a system, we're thinking about 6 conditions. We're thinking about the mental models and the beliefs that we hold that really drive everything we do. We're thinking about how do we shift relationships and connections? How do we change power dynamics? How do we change policies, practices, and all of those have to be true for us to really shift the system from what it is today to what it should be for more families and communities. I'm going to skip some of those, but hopefully the slide deck gets shared. But actually, I will go back real quick. So we do a lot of leadership development. We're developing folks to design policies. We're developing folks' capacity to advocate and organize. We're developing folks' capacity to run for elected office. And we're developing the capacity of entrepreneurs to have thriving businesses, because we know we need to develop and control our own resources to achieve those powerful changes we know are critical. And we also have 2 coalitions. The idea is that we develop leaders and entrepreneurs, we funnel them into coalitions that they then lead. Snapshot of some of our impact. Our main goal is to change policies that lead to outcome shifting for impacted people. So as I transition to the research part of this conversation, I like to ground this part in the wise words of Adrienne Marie Brown, and that is, trust the people. If you trust them, they will become trustworthy. And I deeply believe that research is about holding space for everyday people to activate their wisdom, their experience, and that is the most invaluable source of research that we can ever tap into, and that relies on trust and relationships. So there's 6 principles that really drive how we engage in community reimagination campaigns and how we develop our policies that then drive our coalition and campaign work. So the first one is, which probably aligns to all you brilliant doctors and researchers in here, the quantitative data and results do matter. I think a lot of times we try and separate that when we think about community-driven processes, but it is our responsibility to do work that leads to measurable changes in people's lives. And so that first principle is saying that quantitative results matter, and we use those quantitative results to hold ourselves accountable and to also learn. And stories matter as much as that quantitative data. There's so much nuance, there's so much richness, and there's so much humanity when we center the stories and lived experiences of people beyond a few numbers. And it really makes the data more accessible and tells us things that the data may not reveal. That third principle is that it is not just our job to research oppressed people, it is our job to uplift and activate them. And our belief is that oppressed people are the most sacred and invaluable researchers we will ever be able to activate, because it is their experiences about the challenges, their needs and dreams that should drive what goes in that white paper, what goes in that report, what becomes a policy or a practice. The fourth principle is that the goal is not research. The goal is to change outcomes and to change lives. And so we believe that research is a tool for building power, and there is a larger effort that the research should be driving towards. So it's a means to an end, not the end in itself. The fifth principle is that grassroots radical visioning is critical. And not only is it critical, it should be properly resourced. When we say properly resourced, that means that when we do grassroots work, when we do community-based work, that should not be a pet project, that should not be a low budget project, that should have really rigorous resources for high quality research and the infrastructure and tools for high quality research to be just as true as if it were being done in a lab or on a computer with all the analytics and stats and all the language that I actually don't know because I'm not a formal researcher. And then that last principle is that process matters as much as the product. So yes, it's important to have the numbers. Yes, it's important to have the qualitative data, but the way in which we treat each other, the relationships we build, the steps that we take, the values and principles that drive the process is really important, because this work is about, again, centering our humanity, honoring our dignity. And if we do this work in a transactional way, I would argue that the data doesn't mean much, because how we practice, how we go through the process is the practice for how we address those disparities that are that get revealed in that data work. So these are two quick case studies of how we apply these principles. As I mentioned earlier, the first step in WePower's work is to reimagine a system, and we reimagine social systems, and it culminates in a playbook. So these are two playbooks. We published the first playbook in 2020, focused on what is the vision and the roadmap for transforming early childhood in St. Louis. And then we're wrapping up right now the the creation of a community wealth building playbook, which will drive all of our work for how do we build community wealth across our region in St. Louis. So there was a lot of work that was done that preceded WEPOWER's community design process. And that was really the catalyst to say, like, there's a clear need and there are clear disparities, but how do we develop a roadmap and how do we have a research-based set of solutions that are driven by community and not just developed off in a silo? So we had a pretty rigorous design process. We had a group of community members called Tomorrow Builder Fellows, 14 fellows. They were all impacted by the early childhood education system in some way. They were activists working to disrupt the school to prison pipeline, pre-K, starting in pre-K. Some of them were educators. Some of them were parents of early childhood age children. And they went through a process that, let me go back. That included over 1,000 community members. So they did learning trips across the country to see how other early childhood systems were working to address the challenges. They distributed a survey to ask folks what was their vision, what were the top barriers. And then they facilitated multiple months of community design days. We had a design council, fancy word for advisory board. We had work groups that they co-facilitated. And then we also had some other work that was happening in parallel. And then all of that input work in collaboration with researchers from across the country culminated in this early childhood playbook. So the playbook has 17 high-level solutions. Is broken down into 32 solutions, and they're all either evidence-informed or evidence-based. I believe I said that right. All right, great. They're organized by 5 key areas. We have a clear vision, set of values, and we also acknowledge what existing work to build on so we don't reinvent the wheel. Over 150 community members, organizations have signed on to this playbook, and it now serves as the blueprint across the region for what we do in the early childhood sector. These are a snapshot of solutions: competitive wages and benefits, family well-being being critical, knowing that folks need quality, culturally responsive healthcare the moment that a mother is pregnant. We also talk about the need of building power. It's not just about the quality of experience in the classroom. It's about how do we make sure parents and care providers have power and agency over what policies and decisions are made instead of the decisions being done to them and not with them. We also talk a lot about the need for governance and coordination. So a coordinating entity that really drives the systems change so we're a lot less fragmented. These are just some snapshots of the playbook accomplishments today. So Dr. Latrice spoke to, we've won actually over $17 million in public funding for early childhood. Some of that is recurring revenue. So for the first time in St. Louis, because of our work, there is a dedicated revenue stream for early childhood that never existed before. So the childcare community is able to tap into that every year. And even this year, we're working to win about $22 million more that will be recurring every year. And the next year, going after another $76 million. Thank you. Just a few details about how all the dots connect and how we develop leaders and then activate them to change policies and laws. One of our design fellows went from being part of that process to running for school board, the first Latina to get elected to the school board. Another person who was part of that playbook design process was an alderwoman, and she sponsored the legislation that helped us get that first ever revenue stream that now exists for early childhood. So we try to be as collaborative as possible because we know it's not just about reimagining the system, but having the right actors that can take the idea and change it into policies and laws. And then we continue to do this work at a micro level almost every week. So when we design a specific policy, for example, this year, we're bringing childcare providers because they are the best experts in the policies in the same room as lawyers and researchers. Providers tell the researchers what to do, and the researchers and lawyers take it and turn it into legislation. And then we have just wrapped up a similar process of reimagining our economy. And I will speak briefly because I think that means my time is up, right? Maybe. I don't know if I read that right. All right. So very similarly, we had design fellows. So we had 14 folks all impacted by the harm that our economy does to marginalized folks. We had these 5 solution teams. They met 4 times, 8 hours a day. And then we had a design council, fancy word for advisory board. And then we had a design team that worked behind the scenes. So those were the more formal researchers, the project management team, the experts on like process and facilitation. And these are the themes of the different design days where folks came together for 8 hours. So the first day was reading research briefs on what is the problem, what is the data. The second design day was learning from subject matter experts from across the globe on making sense of those research briefs, what are innovative models that are addressing these problems. And then they started to ideate what are solutions that can respond to the context here in St. Louis. The third design day, they started to prioritize solutions. So design day 2, there were like 200 solutions they came up with. By the end of the process, we got down to about 70. We were hoping to get down to less, but economic injustice is centuries of harm, so we couldn't get it down to a simple solution. And then we developed the theory of change, vision, values, and now we will publish that playbook informally at the end of this month, and then we'll publish it formally at the top of next year. Snapshot of some of those beautiful fellows. Some of the solution team members, that was on design day 1. And just a few details tied to this process, similar to the early childhood playbook design. We had someone who completed our candidate readiness program now get elected as an alderwoman, different from the other alderwoman I spoke about. And she participated in this playbook design process and has now pledged to leverage her elected seat to then champion some of the policies that come out of what we publish in this community wealth building playbook. We are going to pivot next for the rest of the year to figuring out what do we prioritize, because we can't do all 70 things at once. And then this time we're focusing on both policy advocacy campaigns, but we will also pilot some more innovative things to make the case for why it should become policy. So I'm done. I'll wrap up with just a quick recap of the principles that really drive our approach to community-based research. That is that quantitative results matter if we are truly accountable to community. The stories matter just as much. Oppressed people are our most invaluable researchers. Research is a tool, especially a power building tool, and that grassroots radical visioning should be properly resourced, and include high quality research infrastructure. And then lastly, process matters as much as the product. So my 2 calls to action for you all are to assess your practice of these 6 principles, and then to identify partners and pathways so you can transition, still commit to research because we know it's critical, but to also make sure that the research is leveraged for power building and policy change. And I will wrap up with the quotes and just ask you to think of one of those that you want to hold in your heart and mind as you think about this work that we have to do, especially this year leading up to the election and even beyond. So thank you.
Let's give Charli another round of applause. Excellent work in St. Louis. I'm going to introduce our moderator for the Policy Power panel now. Ife Finch Floyd is the Director of Economic Justice at the Georgia Budget and Policy Institute. She leads the Institute's ongoing proactive work to promote economic security and opportunity. She also leads those key components of economic justice. So let's please welcome Ms. Ife Finch Floyd.
Hello, everybody. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much, Dr. Rollins, for inviting me. Again, my name is Ife Finch Floyd, and I'm the Director of Economic Justice at the Georgia Budget and Policy Institute. The Georgia Budget and Policy Institute, we are based here in Atlanta, and we do research and advocacy on a number of different issues, including the safety net issues and also early childhood education. But we're going to hear from some other experts as well, starting with Alycia Hardy. Thank you thank you so much, Ife, and thank you so much, everyone, for being here. We can, go to my slides. So hi, everyone. My name is Alycia Hardy, and I'm coming by way of Washington, D.C. via Limestone, Maine. I was born into a military family, so I have been in D.C. for the last 23 years, but I just want to give you a little bit of my background before I hop into today's presentation. I am a proud product of the national treasure, Morgan State University. You know, I've been hearing everybody rep their HBCUs, got to do mine as well. So I'm here proudly representing Morgan State University. I'm committed to the liberation and well-being and thriving of Black children and families, something that was really rooted in my upbringing, but as well that was very much instilled and foundational to the work and the learning and the experiences I had at Morgan State University. And then with that, I really worked to center racial equity and intersectionality in the research and data to inform policy and how those policies drive systems change. And then finally, I am currently the Vice President of Policy and Research at the National Black Child Development Institute. I started there about a month ago, so I'm new, but not new to the work. I always am, what did Issa say, rooting for everybody Black. That is what I do. And I'm so excited to talk a bit about that work and what that looks like from my perspective. I control the slides, let me not forget. So today's roadmap, so first I'll be talking a bit about what drives the policy process, really be working to talk about this different systems of the policy system process and what that looks like related to research and a bunch of other steps that come along with the policy process. I'll be working to, in the next part of the presentation, talk about how data and research inform policy. And then finally, I'll do some talking about what does it look like to move towards a better system. So I'm going to describe in the next slide the policy process and what drives that process. Next, I'm going to talk about the different stages of the entirety of that continuum in the policy process. Oops. Oh, my slides are not showing up as I'd hoped they would, but nevertheless, we shall persist. So the experiences, perspectives, and norms that shape people deeply influence the incremental processes that dictate policy and resource allocation. And so what that means is we have to look at the policy process from a position of people and who those people are and the experiences that they bring to that work. So these experiences dictate our perspective or how we see the world. And from that perspective, we create a set of norms or standards related to what is good, what is bad, what is healthy, what is unhealthy, what's right and what's wrong, or what we generally see as acceptable. This makes sense as people from different parts of the country or different generations have very differing perspectives of what their lives look like, the experiences they have, and so this all makes sense. But the idea of people being shaped by their experiences also forces us to take a step back and acknowledge that people experience the world in very different ways. And how we experience that world, the world is shaped by a number of intersectional identities, but foundational to that is race. So we definitely have to center race in what that looks like. And we see this in Black communities in terms of how there are extremely divergent experiences from white communities when it comes to experience in the criminal legal system, in health systems, and education systems. And so that's just a couple of examples of the many different ways those experiences are divergent. And so one salient example, particularly from the early care and education space, is how Black children beginning at the earliest years of their lives really experience childcare and early education differently related to expulsion, suspension, push out, isolation, and what that looks like for Black children looks very different in comparison to the experiences of white children. And so that's just an example of how Black children experience the world differently and what that experience looks like and how it could drive policy and what we're going to talk about in the next slides that hopefully show up appropriately. They don't completely show up appropriately, I'm gonna keep going. So while people is only listed one time on this slide, in this graphic, people influence each
stage of the components that are listed on this slide, with their experiences, perspectives, and norms shaping who they are and how they show up in the work. And so while everyone in early care and education community can agree that regardless of our different experiences, that all children deserve access to care that is affirming, that is affordable for parents, that early educators and teachers deserve to have fair wages, living wages. We can all agree to these pieces, agree that everyone deserves a high quality educational experience and early care experiences. What differs is the ideas of how to get to that. What are the strategies to get to that? What do they look like? Who deserves it? And that's where our experiences, perspectives, and norms come into play and how that looks different. And because personal experiences, perspectives, and norms are not always in agreement, again, those strategies will look very different. And the dynamics that carry over into the policy process are really important to recognize as we think about what the entirety of the policy process looks like. And that's because the people in the positions of power to drive that advocacy that we see on the screen, that influence the strategies that are funded, who is centered in receiving those funds, the funding then influences what research is paid for, the required criteria and standards of what that research needs to look like, what are the research questions, what are the research goals and the overall research process, including who is centered, how information is collected and interpreted, interactions with the communities from which that information is being collected, and how that information is ultimately analyzed and disseminated, as well as who has access to it and how it can be used. That research is then used to drive what legislation and policy is advanced, the goals and implementation strategies, and the restrictions or criteria to participate and receive the benefits or experience harms due to that legislation and policy. And finally, legislation and policy drives what resources, services, and programs are available, who is eligible, the requirements to apply, out of research, what are the research strategies, and much, much more. And so ultimately, the perspective and norms show up in the differing definitions of quality and how to achieve it, what a positive learning environment looks like, what amount of funding is connected to the fair compensation for early educators, what affordability, how affordability is defined, and then also, what very importantly, ideas around deservingness. So ultimately, those in a position of power to drive the policy process that influence programs and services, resources through advocacy, funding, and research are often disconnected from those who are most likely to be harmed by those same policies, programs, and services. And that's because of the incremental steps of the policy process are collectively and individually reflect and uphold systemic inequities that center on race. So using research and data to inform the policy process. So where do we find ourselves in the research and policy process? Once we take all that into consideration, what does it look like in real time? And what we see are data and research that's hyper-focused on disaggregation and using whiteness as a standard. I understand that there's a comparison that always happens, but I hate to break it to folks. White people are not doing that great either. Comparatively, sure, there are statistics and data that say that they have outcomes that are better or they have access to better resources, but we know that capitalism, we know that these systems of oppression, in fact, impact us all. So we can't continue to have whiteness as a standard when in fact, the standard that they are said to have is not even what we all are deserving, especially as Black communities. We also have administrative program evaluation and individual assessments and other one-dimensional data that replace the voices and experiences, narratives of Black people. So we are very extractive, have this very hard quantitative perspective of what Black people's experiences are. And if there isn't data to verify the lived experiences that Black people come and bring up as issues, that is somehow invalidated or the data doesn't show that, so there is not a need or a way to address it. And in the current absence of equity-centered community engagement in the data process has really resulted in the weaponization of data, and it feeds into biases rooted in anti-Blackness. It aims to fix people instead of systems. It is, again, verifies or invalidates the experience of Black children and families, and it relies on a deficit framing and language. So we're always seeing, I'm gonna go to the next slide, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. So what did the data tell us? The data continuously tell us that Black children are doing poorly. It tells us that their reading scores are low. It tells us that they have high absenteeism. It tells us that they don't have the right math skills, that their kindergarten readiness is not to where it needs to be. And these are all very individual level assessments and research and data that is not helpful, because we are assessing the Black children, but what about the systems to which they are experiencing and they have access to that create these outcomes? So we're very outcome driven without looking at the inputs of the system that create these outcomes. And so I've kind of touched on this a bit, but how does research and data inform policy? It is very important for establishing program requirements or restriction. So who can apply? What do you need to apply? What is to apply to programs and services and policies? What is the paperwork? Do you have a job? How many hours do you work? There are so many pieces that come from research to say, well, if parents work this amount of hours a week and they need to have this much access to childcare, and we need to only factor in this much travel because this is what average, but who is the average? Who is the standard? Where is this information coming from? And does it reflect the actual experiences of Black children and families, the diverse experiences of Black children and families? Because we are not a monolith. It's used to estimate, it informs policy by estimating need and impact and program efficiency. If a program is taking too long to achieve the outcomes that were established through the research process, it's not effective. But the last speaker said this in a beautiful way, that this is generations upon generations of harm, of oppression, of restrictive access to resources, of exclusion, and the quickness with which people are hoping to see outcomes is not going to happen. And so we can't compare what a timeline looks like to get to systems change, to make those improvements, and when without understanding the historical, political, social context of what that means. Policy is also used to set goals and measure progress and define success. And again, because of that disconnect, how goals are set are devoid of the voices, experience, needs, perspectives of Black children and families. How to measure progress, again, devoid of what our voices and experiences look like. And success is defined, again, without us. All these different pieces, determining resource allocation, defining best practices. I love the idea of best practices, but best practices for who? Who decided what those practices would be? Who is deciding what those practices are leading to? So as we're unpacking all the pieces that come along with the policy process, that come along with research, that get us to understanding what the policies are, it's important to unpack each of the components that lead to what our existing policies are and the systems that they are included in. And finally, I think this gets overlooked quite a bit, but informing implementation policies. We can have all of the ideas or research that we want, but what does it look like to actually implement these policies? Or is it done in a way that is, again, considering the historical, social context of what it looks like for the diverse experiences of Black children and families? Are we looking at what it means to be able to factor in the many systems in which we know Black children and families don't have access? Are we thinking about what transportation looks like? Are we thinking about what access to paid family medical leave looks like, access to healthy food? There's so many aspects that we need to address in terms of implementation to be able to have policies that are effective, meaningful, inclusive, and equitable for Black children and families. So getting us towards a better system. So strategies to shift the policy process have to move from reactive to restorative. A lot of times policies, strategies, programs, initiatives are very reactive. You're reacting to a specific outcome, something that's recently happened, but there's no way or even a hope to or thoughts around how do we restore what has been taken, what has been extracted from this community, as opposed to let's just throw up this quick program. Okay, we need the reading scores up. Let's make sure they have books. We're out of there. That's not effective. That's not helpful, and it's not restorative. Building, sharing, and relinquishing power. I do think that power is finite. And I do believe that in order to build power, it does have to come from somewhere else. And it does have to be shifted in a way that's meaningful, in a way that's going to allow our communities to have the power necessary to create systems that shift what we currently see to what we need. And it's going to look like sometimes failing. We're not always going to have the right strategy right away. It's going to take time. We should be allowed to fail and reimagine and re-envision. It's going to look like rejecting one-size-fits-all strategies. One size does not fit all. Within our communities, within the world that we exist, we have to be inclusive to understand that what success looks like for one family and the pathway to get there is going to look very different for each family. And the idea is to create the biggest and most inclusive policies that we can, so that fewer and fewer people are left out of what change looks like, what systemic change looks like, and being able to benefit from those changes. It's building and rebuilding trust. There's this idea that like, we need to invite people to the table. These tables have existed in our communities for very, very long. Many of them managed and created by Black women in community. So it's not about inviting people to the table. It's about building trust so that you can be invited to those tables. Maybe you don't even need to be at the table, and this is you, not you, but you know what I'm saying here. Maybe it's not even about coming to the table. Maybe it's about, we just want your money so we can be able to do what we need. We just want the resources. And then there is co-creating spaces. But in order to do any of those, there has to be trust. There has to be an ability to relinquish power. And there has to be the idea that Black children and families have what they need to be able to fix the issues that they frankly did not cause and shouldn't be responsible for creating solutions for, but for which they have the knowledge to be able to do so in a way that's meaningful and impactful. Implementation, I went over this, so I'm gonna keep rolling because I know we have limited time, and I do want to get to Q&A. And the next piece is analyzing data in the context, again, of how history, experience, perspectives, and norms currently impact what those outcomes are. We can't look strictly at outcomes without that specific context. It also comes with equity mapping, and equity mapping meaning we're not just saying where are resources located. Oh, this community doesn't have the same resources that what we see in a white community, but what are the resources that this particular Black community looks like, and what this community needs and what it looks like here can be very different from the community 10 miles away. We need to be able to have very specific ideas of what access looks like. Is there transportation to be able to get to these services and the programs? Are they in the communities in the ways that they need them and show up at the hours that are important to the families? So we have to really think about equity in the sense, not of us, is the program there, but is the program there? Is it the right program? Is it at the right hours? Does it have the right people who are managing those programs? What does it look like to have equity and be able to have a physical map to understand what that looks like? And then there's integrating data across state strategies. I know I just said, we don't need to look at all the data, administrative data, but it is an important source of data. But it's not helpful if it's in a silo. If we're only looking at data from one agency and we're not connecting them across the agencies, both to alleviate the burdens of applying for programs, as well as to create an idea of how we can create connected services, because people don't live their lives in one program. People's lives are encompassing of all the different needs that they have. And so we need to create a comprehensive idea of what the data are to tell us where there are gaps, and then we can use that to boost the qualitative data and information collected from communities by communities in a way that's not extractive. It should be a process at the very beginning of the research process, of the data process, is planning with communities from the very beginning. And there should be interactive processes throughout to be able to have touch points to say, is this the right information? What does it mean? How are we developing questions together throughout the entire process? I know we're doing a panel with questions, but I am going to pass it back to Ife. Thank you so much, everyone. I look forward to your questions.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Alycia. Next, we're going to have Parker Gilkesson Davis, who's a senior policy analyst at the Center for Law and Social Policy.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I know we've just had lunch earlier, so if y'all could give me a stretch really quick, a stretch and shake. Yes. All right, so again, my name is Parker Gilkesson Davis, and I am a senior policy analyst with the Center for Law and Social Policy. So the Center for Law and Social Policy is a national policy organization located in Washington, D.C., which is great. Woo. So in my role, I get to advocate for anti-poverty policies and help policymakers ensure that their bills, whatever they're writing, is rooted in equity and reflects justice. So I specifically work with programs like TANF and SNAP. So for those of you who don't know, TANF is cash assistance or the temporary assistance for needy families. And then SNAP is a supplemental nutrition assistance program or food stamps. Most people know it as food stamps. So my goal is to highlight how these programs obviously help people. They do wonderful work, but also it's important in my role that I highlight how these programs can be improved and how can they be improved for our communities. I heard a lot of people shouting out their HBCUs. I went to Howard University. Hello. Whoop, whoop, HU, you know. And so one thing that I know they taught us while we were in school is to make sure that we uplifted our communities and the needs overall of our communities. And so I've taken that in my work everywhere that I've gone. And one thing today that I want to talk to you all about is transformative policy change and how we do that on my team. So for my team, that work falls into two categories, but it falls under a broader umbrella of lived experience partnerships that we've been working on. Obviously, we are a national organization. So to take this on many years ago was definitely a challenge. We are not a grassroots organization, but it's something that I thought was necessary. And so the two buckets that fall under our narrative change, and then also identifying historical and systemic racism within public benefits policy. Y'all, if y'all hear me out of breath, I'm pregnant. And walking up them steps and across the stage, Lord about them took me out. So thank you for your patience. So overall at CLASP, within the last decade, we have really been on a journey to explicitly include racial equity on our journey. And initially, they were nervous about specifically and intentionally talking about racial equity and talking about how different things could be racist, which ended up being problematic specifically for our work in the public benefits space. We know that there are a lot of dog whistle politics, there are a lot of rhetoric that comes along with public benefits. And so us intentionally addressing it is important, it's necessary, and it also makes people feel seen, right? So it's our goal to embark on the journey to uplift narrative change overall. So we know that public opinion guides policy. And I'll say that again, public opinion drives policy. I wish all the white papers that we wrote, specifically me, drove all the policy changes, but unfortunately, it doesn't always work like that. And so we've tried to shift our approach around how can we ensure that we begin shifting the narrative, then move that and trickle that down to policy change, right? So we're traditionally a think and do tank. I know y'all heard of a think tank. CLASP always likes to traditionally say we do as well, because we do a lot of outreach and different things like that. And we've traditionally been heavily steeped in research and database. But based on my previous experience, that's the wonderful thing that I always tell them about hiring diverse people. I didn't come from policy originally. I came from social services, giving people their food stamps, okay? That's where I started out. And so just from that space and that experience and my clients that I had, I knew that we just could not base our policy research and our policy discussions solely from our bubble in Washington, D.C., right? And not engage people. So we created the Community Partnership Group, which is a group of people with which is a group of activists with lived experience that we partner with. And we didn't just want to partner with them just on one project. We wanted to partner with them long-term, build deep relationships, and also have our policy priorities guided by them, and really think through how narrative change, some of the priorities that they're setting for their own communities, like I said, they're activists in their own communities, could begin to shift the space and shift the conversations with Congress people, with state legislators, all those good things. And so through their work and presence, they have helped shift the ideals in the anti-poverty space overall, the anti-hunger space. So many more people. I've been so grateful to hear about community-driven policy, community engagement. When I first started, that was like taboo. You can say it, it was so difficult to get through people's minds that this was important work to be done. Not only was it important, it's necessary. So I'm so happy to hear some of your presentations today. But like I said, the next place that I would definitely talk about outside of narrative change is identifying historic and systemic racism. So like I told y'all, I used to work for social services, and I noticed how tedious and unfair policies were for public benefits overall. I noticed how a lot of my clients were coming in, they were receiving TANF, but they just wanted childcare. That's really what they wanted. And they would send them through the rigmarole, so many different work requirements and different things that felt like, this kind of feels racist, but I don't know how to prove it. So I'm so grateful for the work that I'm able to do now at CLASP, where we're able to call that out. And we have plenty of research that we've done to talk about the history of racism in public benefits programs. We also have plenty of research to talk about the policies that exist today, like work requirements or other policies like the family cap, different things of that nature that prevent people from receiving the program altogether. And they don't equal a poverty reduction, but they do equal a caseload reduction, right? So I'm definitely, like I said, grateful that we're able to have those conversations intentionally. And those conversations have helped policymakers and also state agencies do better in their work. When people are coming into your agency, how do they feel? Do they feel disrespected? Do they feel disregarded? Are they just being cast to the side and treated like any old person, right? And also, how are you implementing the asset limit in your state? Asset limits don't have to be taken up by every single program in every state. Are you taking that up in your state? How are your fraud prevention? Do you focus all of your funding on fraud prevention and none of your TANF funding towards actually giving a benefit to people, right? These are things that we've been able to look at with our research. So although current systems that exist, they do help people. I always have to preface that because I've gotten in trouble sometimes. We know that we have to acknowledge previous harms, right? We have to acknowledge previous harms that exist today, and also really create intentional narrative change and talk about the systems and the racism that's happened before to create a brighter vision for moving forward. Because if we just continue to act like these policies are race neutral, we're not going to get anywhere, right? So looking forward, soon, our team will be releasing a paper on our community-driven policies and practice work. So to the young lady who spoke earlier from St. Louis, I'm from the Midwest, Sue, hey, okay, hey, bro. I really did love a lot of what they talked about because we did that as well in 3 different places, along with our community partnership group. But we desire to see in Baltimore, in Las Vegas, and also in the Pacific Northwest with indigenous populations, what they feel economic justice is for them. And one of the things we talked to youth, which was great, the youth gonna tell you, honey, they gonna tell you the truth. And one of the truths they let us know is that they don't even consider public benefits as something that can help them at all. They don't consider it, they don't see it as something that's gonna help them move towards economic justice. And as people who give our lives to work on this, we really had to think about that. They are our future, and they don't see this as something they even want to attempt to apply for, right? Which is so important. So they had a lot of different conversations about reparations and so many other different things, but it was wonderful work that we were able to do. And so we know now, just from that work, there are still some bold changes that need to happen in terms of TANF, which is a very restrictive program. Still bold changes in terms of SNAP and Medicaid that need to happen. And we're continuously looking for ways to improve the TANF program at the state, regional, and local levels. So evaluating agency culture, all our necessary starts, right? So in closing, like I said, narrative change and addressing historical and systemic racism have been effective tools for transformative policy change for our team. And so we look forward to continuing to shift the policy space towards equity and justice through that work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Parker. Next, we're going to have Patrick McFarlane, Government Relations Manager from the Childcare Resource Center in California.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Patrick McFarlane. I was born and raised in Los Angeles, California. And I have two daughters, Leah, who's almost 7, and Maya, who will be 2 later this year. And I'm so proud of the experience I've had being a father, and particularly my oldest daughter. This is her last week of school, and I was kind of sad to miss the last week, but she did so well all year. And she got perfect marks on her, I guess, report card in kindergarten. And she was so excited. And I said, that's amazing. I would love to celebrate this. I'll get you anything you want. What do you want? And she said, low top Jordans. So that's what I was most proud of. So she let me pick, and I picked her some Jordans, and she thought I'd made a good choice. So I wanted to share that moment of joy, because I know it's late in the day. And I just thought that was such a perfect encapsulation of what it means to be a Black parent. And, sharing our stories, these stories, is so impactful in the work that we do in policy. So I'll talk a little bit about what I do, and just a little bit about how research impacts what I do and how I use it. So Childcare Resource Center is a resource and referral, CCR&R, in Los Angeles and San Bernardino. Can I get a show of hands, folks know those places, San Bernardino? Okay, next Friday, in the movie Next Friday, they reference Rancho Cucamonga, which is in San Bernardino. It's a neighboring county to Los Angeles. In some ways, it's a suburb. It's also the most geographically large county in the nation, and it's the 5th most populous. So this is a area with a region with 12 million people. So it's huge. And the context for this is that in California, Black people are about 8%. So that's a lot of Black people that don't get the amount of attention that they probably should get from state, local, federal officials. And so using this data really helps us elevate the stories, the lived experiences, and also the policy solutions. So again, CCRC serves about 50,000 children and families on a monthly basis. The programs include CCDBG, TANF, and Head Start. We also have other programs, health, mental health, parent cafes, provider trainings, and again, in Northern LA County and in San Bernardino County. One of the most impactful things I do in my work is just taking parents with us when we do our advocacy work, whether that's going to Sacramento or Washington, DC, taking parents with us, giving them a chance to sit down with their state legislator, member of Congress, and tell their story. I think that's one of the most impactful things that we do. But doing that with the data is so much more powerful. So a lot of times in a service area that doesn't have a huge majority Black population, our concerns can be minimized. Some of the challenges that we face don't raise to the level of a priority for elected officials. And so the data that I share with elected officials is that in the service area, which is about 8% Black, in those programs, the CCDBG and TANF programs, the programs that the children that we serve are 25% African American, so dramatically overrepresented in those programs. And that is why it's so important for us to make sure that we're continuing to expand access to these programs and make sure that the participants have a good experience and are able to meet their family needs. So I use data in a handful of ways. The most important way is to support the stories of lived experiences, and then I would say, in also with that is to educate stakeholders, whether that's elected officials or community members. A lot of people don't have a full understanding of the challenges, and so getting people up to a base level of knowledge, like this is what the income eligibility is, this is what need is like, that as a big part of how data is used to inform people. And then also to provide technical expertise. A lot of times legislators will have specific questions about a budget or a bill idea that they need technical expertise. And so having real-time data is critical in providing that technical expertise. I wanted to talk a little bit about a couple of bills that we have this year that are really exciting to me, and these topics have come up throughout the day. So if folks want to talk more, I would love to. So Senate Bill 1112, this would help with providing developmental screenings for children that are enrolled in Medi-Cal, which is California's Medicare. And right now, essentially, there's just not a way for managed care organizations to bill for that. So we're working on that. And then Assembly Bill 2343, which would provide enhanced navigation services for TANF families that are experiencing homelessness. And so those bills, we've used program data, we've used demographic data, we've used community data to talk with legislators through the policy development process, through the policy advocacy process, and then also through the budget process to share the stories, to make technical changes to the legislation, hopefully to get it through and signed by the governor. And then also to lift up the stories of the lived experiences of the participants to really sell that story. So I know I see my time's on 0. So I just had one message for everyone here, is that this policy, for me, it's like sports. I love sports. I try to make sports analogies whenever I can. And you really have to play the long game. This is not a quick victory or a quick defeat. So I would encourage everyone here to organize. We have a long tradition in our community of organizing. So when you leave here, tell one person what you learned and what you're going to do about it, and ask them to do the same. Because I can have all the data in the world. I can tell you how many people are going to benefit. But the more that we continue that chorus, the more impactful all of our policy discussions ultimately are. So that's my message, is to use your voice as much as possible, because those stories are what contribute to the data, which contribute to the policy change.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Okay, gonna have Alycia come back up. And like we have done in other sessions, you can come to the front and ask your question. But I am going to take the privilege to start with a question. I attended the previous session that was in here around guaranteed basic income, and there was a very good conversation that was developing, and I wish we could have continued that conversation. But there was a lot of comments about, using kind of what was learned from those programs, the research, right, to make the case for continuing to expand those programs or to fund those programs, right? And for me, what the challenge I have being a researcher, right, is coming up against narratives that Parker talked about. And these are some of the narratives that we know about when it comes to social programs. It's around these welfare queen narratives about people taking advantage, not wanting to work, trying to steal from the system, not wanting to take care of their kids. And that comes up using a bootstrap concept of hard work that is like a fundamental American value, right? That we believe that people have to do it on their own and to start a business, and that is what success looks like, and that's what we reward, right? And so everyone who's taking it, using those systems, right, is somehow not working hard. And I feel like that's important because we can do really fantastic research and produce a lot of data. But there are these narratives that keep blocking a lot of that data from being utilized or that research from being heard, and those programs from being continued. So I want my panel to maybe start with a little bit of that. Alycia, I loved how you talked about the policy process and what research gets funded. I'd love for you to maybe talk about how even some narratives affect the type of research that happens, and maybe some not as rigorous research. And, you know, again, Parker talking about what that means for public policy. And Patrick, maybe even what narratives that you hear from legislators. So if each of you can maybe just talk about how narratives kind of interact with your work.
Thank you. I was writing down what you were saying. I'm not texting. I just need to be able to keep all of what you were saying, the wonderful things you were saying, and be able to respond to that, because I will go off on a tangent. Narrative is extremely important. The person, wonderful person who presented before us talked about mental models. And that is kind of that's very connected to the experience, perspective, and norms of the framework that I presented. And the mental models are the assumptions, values, and beliefs that hold existing systems in place. And mental models are essentially narratives. It is a story that folks have told over and over again to be able to say, this is why this policy needs to be funded. This is what this means for this person to deserve this. This is what this means to be able to create these restrictions or parameters around those pieces. And so narrative is extremely important and plays a huge role in what policy looks like, as well as creating policy, as well as implementing policy. And I think it's extremely important to start when we're looking at looking at the mental model is at the root of all policy. And so how are we connecting those existing mental models to what the actual mental model needs to be to get us to the right pathway to policy? How are we breaking down, dismantling those narratives in a way that gets us closer to what the model needs to be, in the way that affects systems level change? Because we can't create new systems, we can't imagine new systems, we can't build new systems if they're rooted in the way that is harmful to children and families. So I think it's extremely important, and it's something that is very overlooked. There's always this like, let's go to the data, let's go to the data. When again, even how we dictate what data needs to be collected, what those research questions are, how we're analyzing, what we're using correlational studies, all of that is dictated by what somebody thought should be the key process to create that study, what somebody thought needed to be the idea behind how we are measuring progress, how we are getting to change. And so those narratives and that mental model is extremely important and cannot be overlooked as we're thinking about what systems change looks like and creating pathways to equitable programs and policies. And one last piece I will add on to that, and I was watching online earlier, and they talked about folks needing rest and restoration to be able to create and imagine and build new worlds. People also need to be paid to be able to do that. We can't go into communities and say, hey, we want your help to fix the problems that you never had, and matter of fact, do it for free. I know Parker in her CPG group, they pay people. And so that's so important to be able to do that. And we have to shift the narrative of like, oh, well, if people want to do better, then they'll just volunteer to do this work. They're just going to come to the meeting. If they really cared, if they really want to change in this policy, then they just come to the meetings, and they would fill out the surveys, and they would be able to do. It's not free. That's like very, very taxing work to be able to live the policy that's being harmful to you and work to change that policy. So those narratives are extremely important.
I agree. Narrative is essential. When you're telling a story, you want to make it as compelling as possible. A story that comes to mind for me is around my experiences using paid family leave. My first daughter, when I went to take paid family leave, I was talking to older males in my family and friends, and they all kind of were like, "You're going to do that? Like men do that?" And I was like, "Well, they're giving me free time off. Of course, I'm going to take it." And then I was talking to more of my peers and sharing experiences, and there was kind of that same, I talked to older guys, and they were like, "No, don't do that." And then we're like, "Well, it's free. Why not do it?" And so when I did it, I documented it. I took videos and photos of everything, and it was the most enjoyable experience, especially the second time around, like knowing what was going on and having an older one that I got to do drop off and pick up like every day during that. It was amazing. And sharing it, it changed everything because so many people saw it, people that I didn't think would be impacted by it, that I didn't think, I kid you not, I'm not an influencer or anything. I made a video of my paid family leave. It got 10,000 views. I don't know how. I think it was a song I chose, but a bunch of elected officials saw it, community people saw it, and they told me that it changed a narrative. And I was like, I wasn't trying to do that at all. I was just trying to show that I was having fun and I wasn't working. But I use that as an example because obviously there are narratives around paid leave and there are narratives around all of the programs that we're talking about. And we all can sit here and say, oh, we wish that narrative would be different. And sometimes it's as simple as us talking to our friends and changing the narrative.
So I would say for everyone in the room, if you've ever heard of, oh, they just doing whatever to get those benefits, or if you've heard of the welfare queen or whatever, have any of you ever heard anything like that with a raise of hands? Right. Okay. So that narrative that's been created has been intentional, and unfortunately it's worked. Not only in other communities, but in our own communities, right? We all have seen someone, whether in our family or whatever, and that you have that thought in your mind and you're like, where's that coming from, right? And I think I realized when I worked for social services, that is a complete lie. It's a lie from the pits of it. No, I'm just kidding, but still, it's a lie. It's a lie. And if they can intentionally employ a narrative that has lasted decades, and it has influenced so many policies that are faulty, that don't work, that have less people receiving TANF now than they ever have, that have, I think in the state of Mississippi in 2016, someone just randomly guessed how many people received TANF in that state. And that is the poorest state in America, 100 in the whole state. So, but you also heard about, was it Brett Favre receiving TANF funds? Right. So we cannot take this approach that we're going to fly high and we're not even going to act like those narratives exist. We're going to create policies that combat those narratives, but don't intentionally do it. They just kind of are race neutral. No, they have implored, and y'all know who I mean when I say they. Y'all know who I mean. And it's on both sides. Right. Not us though, but it's on both sides. They not like us, right? I'm like, okay, you know. So you know who I'm talking about, and they have intentionally done it. It has worked. It has caused for us to receive cuts and benefits over and over. We're looking right now, doing farm bill work, $30 billion cut to SNAP. We can't afford that right now. Do y'all see the cost of food? We cannot afford that right now. So for us to sit and act like narrative change isn't a big deal, we're doing ourselves a disservice, right? And so doing this research, people have made us to believe that research is it, data is it. No, we have to go the extra mile to intentionally say, hey, and like I said, y'all, I used to get in trouble for this a lot. Intentionally calling out racism and saying that this policy is racist. The family cap, I don't know if y'all know what that is in TANF, but if you already are in the TANF program and have another child, now you can't receive it any longer. Where does that come from? It comes from, oh, they just trying to have more babies to get them benefits. And there's a policy for that, right? So just by the raise of hands, I saw everybody raise their hands in here, that those narratives work, they're intentional. And so we have to do the work back to say, hey, no, that's not true. Hey, actually, when you all did welfare reform and we thought, oh my God, it's gonna create self-sufficiency, it actually put people deeper into poverty. Right? And calling people out on that. I've had some uncomfortable legislators sitting in their offices, but when we call them out and we start to shift the narrative and they start to see, oh, and I can give a brief example really quickly on narrative shift. In the Farm Bill recently, now both sides.
The Farm Bill, Parker?
Oh, sorry. Yes. The Farm Bill is a large piece of legislation that is usually passed on in a bipartisan way every 5 years, and it funds 70% of SNAP. So it's a big piece of legislation. It also talks about other agriculture, many other different things fall under it, but it's a big, big deal for the SNAP program. And so in that piece, they're talking about actually finally including removing the drug felony ban. So many people don't know, for the SNAP program and for TANF, if you have a felony for drugs, nothing else, but if you have a drug felony, which particularly comes out of the war on drugs, right? You cannot receive SNAP benefits. And now they have included that they want to remove that. Now, the last farm bill, that would have never happened, right? But we've been having multiple conversations, and I'm sure other people have different reasons why, right? Like the opioid overdose epidemic and different things of that nature, right? But the narrative shift that we've been having about returning citizens should not have to be hungry, right? Returning citizens, so continuing to push that narrative we saw the language for it. So yeah, sorry, that was long, but yeah.
Thank you so much for that. I worked on TANF policy for a very long time and still do. So yes, Parker was speaking near and dear to my heart. But we are going to have others come up with questions. Do we have any other questions come up? Oh, yeah, please just walk up to the mic here.
Hello, everybody. First of all, I'm Antoine Seymour, the founder of The Father in Me. Y'all can check us out at thefatherme.com. It's ironic that this is happening today because Emory is doing the same thing with research. They actually just did some research as far as training us, see who want to come in and do some training, because we on the gun violence side of things. So we actually just finished yesterday training on be an advocate in the right policies. That's what we just did yesterday. So I think we got to be able to understand what policy is first and how to advocate. Like, I love what you do. You see, you take the parents down there, and that's what they was getting us to understand. You have to tell your story so they can understand, because a lot of times they up there, they're not down here. And see, we on the gun violence side of things, and all this plays a part in it because it's poverty, it's mental health, it's trauma. All this plays a part in it. So we are creating this ecosystem with the wraparound services. I ain't know nothing about no policies to be an advocate, but now we got this research. Now we have all this data saying that we do know about policies now. So now we glad that y'all actually doing this thing like this. And I appreciate y'all. So anything that my organization can do to help y'all, we here. It's thefatherme.com. Like I say, we 24 hours with this here. That's all we do.
Yes, love that. Thank you. One thing I will say too about sharing your stories and learning about advocacy and all that, it is really important. And it also does give to narrative change, because when politicians are trying to make up random stories and you're in their face, like, but at me, boo, I'm here. You talking about me? Because I don't do that. You know, I just saying. So it really is important too. But I see you have a question, yes.
Hi, I'm C. Mary. I've been doing some work on funding equity in early childhood. So as we increase funding, like Charli was talking about in her initial presentation, as we increase funding, we want to make sure that those funds go into our communities, because we increase funding and then funding is still going majority actually to white communities. And so if we don't have the infrastructure in our communities to pull that funding in, we can continue to increase funding, but we're going to increase inequity with that funding. So I love your thoughts on what you're hearing, what's happening, what's innovative in the space of funding equity.
I know it wasn't a question, but I just want to say I really appreciate that, because there's this idea that high tides lift all boats, and that's just not true. Pouring more money into the system, when folks don't have boats, folks don't have any way to be able to exist in the storm of the sea that continues to try to overpower us, it's just not helpful. And so along with increasing funding, there has to be specific intentional policies, infrastructure, be able to trust communities and community-based organizations to take on those funds. So I really appreciate that.
This is for Parker. I commend you on your work.
This is going to be the last question. I'm sorry.
I commend you on your work. I'm retired from the state of Louisiana, 32 years with the Department of Children and Family Services. And I specialize in transition assistance, TANF, as well as STEP and SNAP. So I know where you're coming from. I know how you feel, but we as people have to continue to reach out to those to help them transition from their assistance. After I left and retired, they got rid of transitional assistance. So I'm with a committee trying to fight it back because they provided transportation to our people to get them back and forth to work. And also I represent the Grambling State University. Yes, I love that, love that.
Thank you so much to my wonderful panel and for this conference. And we are going to transition to the latter part of today.
All right, I'm going to have Dr. Amanda Coleman give us some closing remarks on behalf of OPRE.
Thank you. Yes. I have my phone because I have so many notes and insights. So you might see me looking down, but I do want to give a quick closing on behalf of our team from the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation. This includes Dr. Megan Reed, who serves as the Federal Project Officer for the Center. And she's also here attending in person today. And I just want to say there is so much federal interest in the work of the center. And we at OPRE are truly committed to supporting the center in all of their efforts with the principles of community engagement and equity at the forefront. So now that I've talked a little bit about OPRE, let's talk about what we learned today, which was just so much. So to close us out, I want to take us back to the beginning, to some of the questions and words that William Jackson shared with us in the first session. So he posed the question, how do we make knowledge generation soulful? And I think so many of the breakout sessions today demonstrated that we do this by leveraging the assets of our communities in the research process and in our programs. This includes centering spirituality and our spiritual structures, such as churches. We make our work soulful by letting parents and communities lead. And we see very strong examples of this in WEPOWER's research principles. We also see examples of this in Coastal Plains Head Start program, where they've elevated the parent perspectives on the Policy Council. We see this in Georgia DeKal's Family Peer Ambassador program, or even through some of the OPRE funded work on using community advisory boards in the federal research space. We also make it soulful by elevating the stories of parents, of mothers, of fathers through qualitative research, which was spread throughout the day. And we also can pair this with strong quantitative research that challenges traditional approaches to research that centers whiteness and doesn't value the strengths of Black families like Ms. Hardy discussed. William Jackson also asked us whether our research is rigorous enough to live up to the dreams of Black families. And I think this was also seen throughout today, that rigorous research must take into account the broader systems and structures that constrain opportunity, that serve as a barrier to these dreams and create inequities. And as Ms. Cooksey shared, research must be aimed at improving systems. We're not doing research just to do research. And I think there were several examples of this today, the partnership between Dr. Currington and Mrs. Barnes that centers equity in public pre-K. And lastly, I want to just highlight one more thing that Mr. Jackson told us. He said that proximity is not enough and that people need rest to generate ideas. And I think Ms. Hardy brought this up just recently. And I think we all need to reflect on how we engage parents and community members. How do we create environments where their best ideas and dreams really can thrive and they can share those with us? So I want to give just a really big thank you to you, Dr. Rollins, and the entire center team. You put forth so much effort and work to put this conference together, and it was truly a special space that was created that really celebrates and uplifts Black families and individuals and communities. So thank you, and thank you all for attending.
But thank you definitely to the conference organizers, Matthew's events. You see all the crew organizing and keeping people on time. Thank you all so much. Thank you to the research team, my Associate Director, Dr. King Gordon, our Research Administrator, Michelle Meadows, Communications Co-Lead, Laris Bernard. Thank you all for the tireless hours of getting everything together for what is now about to be done today. Thanks to our funder, the Administration for Children and Families, Office of Planning, Research and Evaluation. I did not give my global disclaimer before we got started that all of the content, all of the thoughts and words are not, those of ACF and HHS, those are our own, but there it is now. So yeah, please, all the things that were said, please don't say ACF, supported those. Thank you all to our amazing presenters who came from around the country to share their wisdom with us. Coming to Atlanta, Georgia, from Oregon, from California, from DC. I mean, thank you all so much. You all have made this an exceptional experience because you are here. And I thank you all for showing up, not being afraid of the water main break issues and all those things. Thank you. I thank you all too for just stopping and showing me love as we were, crossing paths in the hallway, letting me know you're having a good time here and that you feel affirmed in this space. That's the goal. I wanted to make sure that, everybody understood that you're loved here, you feel welcome here, you can say whatever you need to say unapologetically, and still, be effective in that. So thank you. I really appreciate it. Please complete the evaluation. You can scan the QR code or you can put the survey link in there, the bit.ly link. You can put that in there and get to the survey so that we can continue to grow this conference and continue to improve as a center. And finally, since I have the last word, I do love all 105 HBCUs. I appreciate y'all shouting them out today. But Spelman is still number one. We can argue about it at the reception. There is a reception happening directly after this to continue to network and all of those things. And so again, thank you all so much for your time. I hope you all have enjoyed and we'll see you all next year.